Look at this man, filthy, exhausted, wearing a battered donkey jacket, working a job so disgusting that most people in 1960s Britain would cross the street to avoid him. You'd think he barely had a penny to his name, right? Wrong. While the bank managers and doctors were paying crippling taxes, the men doing Britain's dirtiest, hardest jobs were quietly stuffing untraceable tax-free cash under their mattresses. From hauling literal human waste to dodging death on freezing chimney stacks, these weren't just the worst jobs in history, they were the ultimate secret millionaire factories. Today we are counting down the 10 hardest working-class jobs of the 1950s and 60s that secretly built massive property empires. And wait until you see the filthy reality of number 1, you won't believe how much money they made. Coming in at number 10, we have a character straight out of a Victorian nightmare, but who dominated the streets well into the 1960s, the mobile knife sharpener. Imagine a wild-looking man with a long, unkempt beard, pushing a heavy, modified bicycle through the freezing drizzle. He would lift the back wheel onto a makeshift stand, hook up a leather pulley, and pedal furiously to spin a heavy grinding stone at the front. To the local kids, he was terrifying. But to the housewives, he was essential. They charged just pennies to sharpen carving knives and garden shears. It looked like a beggar's existence. But here is the secret. They had absolute zero overheads. No rent, no taxes, no boss. It was a 100% cash-in-hand street hustle. The smartest sharpeners had rounds spanning entire counties, working 14-hour days in the bitter cold. They hoarded their silver coins in tin boxes. While the middle class took out mortgages, these homeless-looking sharpeners were quietly walking into auctions in their dirty coats and paying straight cash for entire rows of terraced houses. They didn't just sharpen the town's knives. Secretly, they owned the streets they cycled on. At number 9 is a job that broke men's backs by the time they were 40, the coal heaver. Before central heating became standard, Britain ran on coal, and delivering it was pure brutal graft. These men would carry 100-weight sacks, that's over 112 pounds, on their backs, trudging through snow up narrow alleyways and tipping the heavy, filthy loads into cellar grates. By the end of the day, their lungs burned and their skin was permanently stained black. During the legendary Big Freeze of 1963, when the country literally froze solid, these men were the only thing keeping families alive. But the freezing cold is exactly where the millionaires were made. The men who started with a single horse and cart, doing the back-breaking hauling themselves, realized they held the ultimate monopoly. People had to pay whatever the cost. The smartest heavers reinvested every penny of their winter windfalls into motorized Bedford lorries. They aggressively bought out weaker competitors who couldn't handle the physical toll. That filthy man dumping coal in your cellar in 1955. By 1965, he was likely the silent owner of a massive regional logistics empire, pulling in thousands of pounds a week while still wearing his dirty flat cap. Number 8 takes us away from the streets and into the most dangerous workplace on Earth, the freezing waters of the North Sea. Being a deep-sea fisherman in the 1960s was essentially playing Russian roulette with the ocean. The grueling 3-week trips meant working 18-hour shifts on a deck covered in black ice, hauling heavy wet nets while freezing waves battered the ship. One slip and you were gone. It was a life of pure misery, the smell of fish and diesel permanently baked into their skin. But the danger came with a legendary payoff, specifically for the skippers. In the trawler game, pay was based on the share system, a percentage of the catch's value. A fearless skipper, who knew where to find the cod, and who pushed his crew to the absolute limit, could return to Hull or Grimsby and walk off the boat with the equivalent of a bank manager's yearly salary in a single trip. The legends of the sea didn't waste their money in the dockside pubs, they bought their own trawlers. By the 1970s, many of these men who had lost fingers to frostbite were sitting in warm offices, multi-millionaires, controlling entire fleets of ships. At number 7, we have the ultimate masters of the nomadic hustle, the Fairground showmen. To the outside world, it looked like a chaotic lower-class gypsy lifestyle, living in cramped caravans, traveling from muddy field to muddy field and spending days doing the grueling heavy mechanical lifting required to build and tear down massive iron rides. They were outcasts, often looked down upon by the settled townsfolk, but the townsfolk were fools. The Fairground was the ultimate cash-generating machine. Thousands of people, every single night, handing over untraceable coins and notes. No receipts, no ledgers for the taxman to see. It was an ocean of liquid cash. The smartest showman families took those massive bags of coins and did something brilliant. They stopped renting the muddy fields and started buying them. They quietly purchased acres of prime real estate on the edges of growing towns. The guy with grease on his face, operating the waltzers, was actually a real estate baron, sitting on land worth millions, hiding his vast wealth behind the flashing lights and candy floss. At number 6, we have a job so notoriously dirty that it became the punchline of British comedies, the Dustmen. Before plastic wheelie bins, rubbish was stored in heavy, rusting galvanized steel bins. Dustmen had to physically hoist these massive, foul-smelling containers onto their shoulders, breathing in toxic coal ash and rotting waste all day long. The official council wage was an absolute joke. They were at the very bottom of the social ladder. But the council wage was just a cover story. The real money was in what the trade called the bunts. The bunts was the secret economy of the streets. Builders, shop owners and wealthy locals would slip the Dustmen cash-in-hand bribes to take away heavy rubble, old furniture or commercial waste off the books. But it didn't stop there. These men had the first pick of everything thrown away in 1960s Britain. They stripped lead piping, sorted valuable metals and kept rare antiques, selling them to scrapyards and dealers on the side. A savvy dustman with a good route was making triple his official salary in pure tax-free bunts, quietly using the neighborhood's trash to build a multi-million-pound property portfolio. Coming in at number 5 is a job that required absolute nerves of steel and a total disregard for human life. The high-altitude steeplejack. In the 1950s and 60s, Britain's industrial skyline was dominated by massive crumbling brick chimneys pumping out toxic smoke. When these monsters needed repairing or demolishing, the steeplejacks were called in. They climbed hundreds of feet into the air, using nothing but wooden ladders tied together with rope. No safety harnesses, no hard hats, just a flat cap, a heavy hammer, and a sheer drop to the concrete below. One gust of wind or one loose brick meant instant death. It was terrifying, back-breaking labor in the freezing wind. But here is the secret wealth reveal. Because the mortality rate was so high, the pay was absolutely astronomical. Factory owners would pay massive sums in cash just to get the job done quickly. The smartest steeplejacks didn't spend their hazard pay in the pub. They saved every single pound, bought their own scaffolding and hired younger men. The guy risking his neck on a crumbling chimney in 1955 was by 1965 the wealthy director of a major industrial engineering firm, living in a detached mansion funded entirely by hazard pay and heights. At number 4, we have the ultimate masters of destruction, the demolition reclaimers. Post-war Britain was scarred by bomb pecks. Massive areas of destroyed buildings and crumbling Victorian slums that the government desperately needed cleared. It was filthy, lung-destroying work. These men spent 12 hours a day swinging heavy sledgehammers, inhaling thick clouds of asbestos, plaster and century-old dust. They were treated as the lowest tier of manual laborers. But the government completely missed what these men were actually doing. The reclaimers quickly realized they weren't just clearing rubble, they were sitting on a gold mine. While the councils paid them a basic wage to destroy the slums, these men were quietly harvesting the spoils. They carefully extracted seasoned Victorian timber, stripped miles of valuable lead piping, and chiseled out thousands of heritage bricks. They essentially invented the multi-million-pound architectural salvage industry. They would sell the government's trash to wealthy property developers for pure, untraceable cash. The man covered in brick dust wasn't just a laborer, he was a highly paid architectural broker in disguise. Number 3 takes us to the roaring, chaotic heart of places like London's Petticoat Lane, the Suitcase Market pitchman. Out in the freezing rain, howling wind or blistering heat, These men stood on wooden crates, shouting until their voices went hoarse. They started with nothing but a battered cardboard suitcase filled with cheap nylon stockings, razor blades or china plates. It was a brutal hustle. You had to have the fastest mouth in the city, keeping a crowd entertained while simultaneously keeping an eye out for the police or rival gangs. To the local bank manager, walking past in his tailored suit, this screaming street vendor looked like a desperate man begging for loose change. But the bank manager was the one getting played. These pitchmen were operating entirely outside the tax system. Selling thousands of items a day for pure cash meant they were generating staggering amounts of wealth with zero paper trail. While the middle class was heavily taxed, the suitcase hustler was stuffing rolls of pound notes into his pockets. Within a decade, that screaming man on the wooden crate was quietly buying up the very market halls he used to stand outside of, becoming a secret millionaire landlord commanding the entire high street. Just missing the top spot at number 2 is a street legend you might recognize, but with a highly lucrative twist: the antique totter. We all know the traditional rag-and-bone man shouting for old iron from his horse and cart. It was a freezing, miserable existence, hauling heavy scrap metal through the mud. But there was an elite tier within this trade. The smartest totters realized that hauling rusting iron was a mug's game. Instead, they developed an expert, razor-sharp eye for the hidden treasures inside the homes of elderly widows and old Victorian estates. They were looking for block tin, solid silver teapots, and original Georgian furniture. When they yelled for junk, they were actually hunting for masterpieces. They would buy a priceless antique chair for a few shillings from someone who thought it was just firewood, and then secretly sell it to posh city dealers in London for hundreds of pounds. This was a completely unregulated, tax-free empire. Legends like the famous Herbie Summers worked the streets looking like absolute paupers, but when they died, the town was left in shock. Behind the dirty flat cap and the tired horse was a man with a property portfolio worth over £1 million. They were the ultimate wolves in sheep's clothing. And finally, at number 1, the most taboo, the most disgusting, and the most secretive wealth-building job in British history: the night soil man. Even well into the 1950s and 60s, many rural areas and older terraced houses in Britain still didn't have indoor plumbing. They had outdoor outhouses, essentially deep holes filled with human waste. When those holes filled up, the night soil men were called in, working under the cover of darkness. These men had the horrific job of manually shoveling literal human feces into horse-drawn carts. The smell was unimaginable. The social stigma was so severe that people would cross the street to avoid walking near them. They were the absolute untouchables of British society. But this extreme taboo is exactly what made them staggeringly rich. Because absolutely no one else was willing to do the job, the night soil men could charge extortionate premium rate, and it was all paid in cash. Furthermore, they double-dipped by selling the soil to local farmers as high-grade fertilizer. They operated in total secrecy, making astronomical sums of money while society completely ignored them. And there you have it, the ultimate proof that in 1960s Britain, the dirtiest coats often hid the deepest pockets. Did you or your family ever deal with any of these legendary street hustlers, or did you know a local totter who secretly owned the town? Drop your memories in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you want more untold history about the grit and graft of the past, hit that subscribe button. Until next time.